When Sarah Mitchell stood knee-deep in her grandfather's basement clutter, surrounded by the fading echoes of a life well lived, she never imagined that beneath the decades of accumulated junk lay a secret that would change everything. Her husband's life insurance check had barely covered the funeral expenses, leaving her alone with mounting debts, a foreclosure notice, and 2 teenage daughters who needed more than she could provide. The old Victorian farmhouse on the outskirts of Millfield had been her grandfather's pride, but now it was just another burden, one the bank was eager to claim. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The basement air hung thick with dust and memories as Sarah sorted through cardboard boxes filled with her grandfather Howard's possessions. Each item seemed to whisper stories of the man who'd raised her after her parents' accident, the decorated World War II veteran whose mind had slowly faded in his final years, taking with it whatever secrets the house contained. Her oldest daughter, Emma, stood at the top of the stairs, arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Mom, Mr. Donovan from the bank called again. He says we have until the end of the month." Sarah nodded without looking up, her hands still moving mechanically through a box of old uniform parts and military medals. 42 days since the funeral, 38 since she discovered the second mortgage, and 26 days until they would lose the only stable home her girls had ever known. The basement represented her last desperate hope, perhaps something of value hidden among the carefully preserved relics of a generation that saved everything. "Emma, honey, could you bring down another trash bag?" Sarah called, her voice steady despite the tightness in her throat. "And check on your sister. Lily's been too quiet." The local auction house had already taken the antique furniture from upstairs. The military memorabilia would go next, though the thought of selling her grandfather's medals made Sarah's stomach clench with guilt. Howard Mitchell had survived the Battle of the Bulge and brought home shrapnel in his leg that troubled him until the day he died, but never once complained. Now she was reduced to selling his Purple Heart to pay the power bill. As Sarah pushed aside a stack of moldering National Geographic magazines, her hand brushed against something solid beneath an old wool army blanket. Pulling away the heavy fabric revealed a metal handle embedded in the concrete floor, nearly invisible beneath years of grime and dust. The discovery stopped her cold. In all her childhood years exploring this house, she'd never seen this before. "Emma," she called, her voice echoing against the stone walls. "Can you come down here for a minute?" Together they cleared away the surrounding debris, revealing what appeared to be a small metal hatch approximately 3 feet square, its edges sealed with some kind of weathered rubber gasket. The handle was secured with a padlock so rusted it crumbled when Sarah applied pressure with a nearby hammer. "What do you think it is?" Emma asked, her earlier teenage indifference replaced by genuine curiosity. "I'm not sure," Sarah replied, studying the heavy metal door. "Your great-grandfather never mentioned anything like this." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. With Emma's help, Sarah gripped the metal handle and pulled. The hatch resisted at first, then opened with a sound like a last exhale, releasing a rush of stale air that carried with it the faint scent of something Sarah couldn't immediately identify. Beneath the hatch, concrete steps descended into darkness. "Mom, don't," Emma whispered, clutching her mother's arm. "What if it's not safe?" Sarah hesitated, then reached for the heavy-duty flashlight they'd been using to navigate the dimly lit basement corners. "Stay here," she said firmly. "If I'm not back in 5 minutes, call Mr. Reynolds next door." The steps were sturdy beneath her feet, built to last like everything else from that era. 17 steps down, the narrow stairwell opened into a space that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. Her flashlight beam revealed a fully constructed room approximately 15 feet square, with walls of reinforced concrete and a ceiling supported by steel beams. This was no ordinary cellar or storage space, this was a purpose-built bomb shelter straight out of Cold War nightmares. But it was what filled the shelter that caused Sarah's knees to weaken. Along the walls stood metal shelving units stocked with decades-old provisions, canned goods, water containers, medical supplies, a complete survival cache. A small desk held a military-grade radio transmitter. In the corner sat an old camp bed with wool blankets still neatly folded at its foot. And most surprising of all, stacked carefully on a central table, were several wooden crates with stenciled military markings. "Mom?" Emma's voice floated down from above. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," Sarah called back, her voice sounding strange even to her own ears. "I found something. I think you should come see this." Emma descended cautiously, her phone's flashlight adding another beam to the darkness. When she reached the bottom step, she froze. "Is this a bomb shelter? Like from those old movies?" "I think so," Sarah replied, moving toward the wooden crates. "Your great-grandfather never talked much about his time after the war. He worked for the government, but he never said exactly what he did." The first crate opened with surprising ease, its contents protected from the ravages of time by the shelter's controlled environment. Inside, packed in straw, were dozens of small canvas bags. Sarah picked one up, feeling its unexpected weight. With trembling fingers, she loosened the drawstring and poured the contents into her palm. Gold coins gleamed in the flashlight beam, old coins with foreign markings, their surfaces still bright despite the passing decades. The second bag revealed the same, as did the third. "Mom," Emma whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Is that real gold?" Sarah couldn't answer. Her mind raced with questions as she moved to the second crate. This one contained documents, hundreds of them, some in English, many in German, secured in waterproof military document cases. Photographs showing men in uniform standing beside art crates. Inventory lists with museum names. And strangest of all, a handwritten journal with her grandfather's distinctive penmanship. "I don't understand," Sarah murmured, carefully opening the journal to its first page. The entry was dated April 1945. "Today we recovered another cache from the salt mine. Paintings mainly, some reportedly from private Jewish collections. Goring had been hoarding these along with the museum pieces. Command is documenting everything before transport, but some items are being classified immediately. I've been tasked with securing certain assets that won't be appearing on any official manifest. God help me, I don't know what's right anymore." Sarah's hand flew to her mouth as understanding dawned. Her grandfather, her kind, quiet grandfather who'd taught her to fish and built dollhouses for her daughters, had been part of the Monument's men, the Allied forces tasked with recovering art and cultural treasures stolen by the Nazis. But this hidden room suggested something more complicated, something he'd kept secret even from his own family. The third crate contained small canvas-wrapped parcels that, when unwrapped, revealed jewelry of exquisite craftsmanship, diamond necklaces, emerald rings, gold bracelets set with precious stones, the kind of personal treasures that might have been stripped from wealthy families before they were sent to concentration camps. "Mom, what is all this?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did great-grandpa get these things?" Sarah shook her head, still struggling to reconcile the grandfather she'd known with the evidence before her. I think he was supposed to return these things to their rightful owners after the war. But something must have happened." As she spoke, Sarah's flashlight beam caught something on the far wall, a large map of Europe with colored pins marking various locations, and beside it, a metal filing cabinet. The top drawer contained dozens of folders with names, photographs, and detailed family histories. The second drawer held more official-looking documents, transport authorizations, security clearances, and letters on War Department letterhead. One folder, labeled personal in her grandfather's handwriting, contained a stack of unopened letters addressed to various people across Europe, each with the same return address, Howard Mitchell, Millfield, USA. Letters that had never been sent. He was trying to find them, Sarah whispered, more to herself than to Emma. The families these things belonged to. He was trying to return them. The bottom drawer of the filing cabinet revealed one final surprise. A leather portfolio containing detailed notes about each piece in the shelter, along with newspaper clippings about international efforts to restore Nazi-looted art and valuables to Holocaust survivors and their descendants. The most recent clipping was dated just 3 months before Howard's health had begun its final decline. "He never forgot," Sarah said, her voice breaking as pieces of her grandfather's secret life fell into place. All those trips to Europe when I was little, the mysterious phone calls, the visitors who spoke with accents. He was still looking for them. Emma moved to stand beside her mother, her hand resting gently on Sarah's shoulder. So what do we do now? Sarah looked around the secret room that contained both salvation and moral challenge. The gold alone would solve their financial problems instantly. The art and jewelry represented a fortune that could secure her daughter's futures for generations. But the weight of her grandfather's unfinished mission pressed against her conscience with undeniable force. We do what he would have done, Sarah said finally, her decision crystallizing with surprising clarity. We finish what he started. Upstairs, the sound of the front door slamming echoed through the old house, followed by Lily's voice calling for her mother and sister. Before they ascended, Sarah picked up her grandfather's journal and tucked it into her pocket. Whatever happened next, she knew their lives had changed forever. The home she'd been so desperate to save now held a purpose far greater than simple shelter. It contained a legacy of secrets and responsibilities that would redefine everything she thought she knew about the quiet man who had raised her. As they climbed the stairs back to the basement, Emma paused. Mom? Do we tell Lily? Sarah considered the question as she secured the hatch behind them. Her younger daughter was only 14, impulsive and emotional in the way teenagers often are. But she was also Howard's favorite, the one who'd sat beside his bed during those final days, absorbing stories about a war that had ended decades before she was born. We tell her everything, Sarah decided. This isn't just about us anymore. Your great-grandfather was trying to right a historic wrong. If we're going to finish what he started, we'll need to do it together. The basement that had seemed so hopeless just hours before now hummed with possibility and purpose. As Sarah brushed the dust from her clothes and prepared to share their discovery with her younger daughter, she felt the first stirring of something that had been missing since the funeral, not just hope for their financial survival, but a sense that perhaps there was meaning to be found even in loss. Howard Mitchell had left them more than a house, he'd left them a mission, a mystery, and most importantly, a chance to be part of something that mattered. Tomorrow they would need to make difficult decisions about what came next. But tonight, as the sun set over the old Victorian farmhouse that had seemed destined for foreclosure, Sarah knew they wouldn't be leaving after all. The bank would have to wait. History had laid claim to this house and its inhabitants long before the mortgage had come due. 3 days after discovering the secret bomb shelter, Sarah Mitchell sat at her kitchen table surrounded by stacks of folders. She'd barely slept, spending every available moment cataloging the contents of her grandfather's hidden vault. The initial shock had given way to methodical documentation, a skill she'd honed during 15 years as a high school librarian before budget cuts had eliminated her position last spring. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The morning light filtered through dusty curtains, illuminating the spread of photographs, documents, and her grandfather's journal entries. Sarah had sent the girls to school despite their protests, needing time alone to make sense of what they'd found. Each page of Howard Mitchell's journal revealed a man she hadn't fully known, a young soldier thrust into the chaos of post-war Europe, tasked with recovering stolen art and valuables, and ultimately haunted by decisions made amid the rubble of a shattered continent. August 1945, she read aloud, tracing her finger across her grandfather's precise handwriting. Transport diverted after bridge collapse outside Munich. Captain Reynolds ordered immediate inventory. 3 crates missing from manifest, reported destroyed in transit. God forgive me. The doorbell's sudden ring startled Sarah from her reading. Through the front window, she recognized Thomas Donovan's silver BMW parked in the driveway, the bank representative who'd been pressuring her about the mortgage payments. Taking a deep breath, she quickly gathered the papers into a folder and tucked it beneath the sofa cushion before answering the door. Mrs. Mitchell, Donovan nodded, his expression a practiced blend of sympathy and authority. At 45, he had the polished appearance of someone who'd never known real hardship, pressed shirt, manicured nails, and a smile that never reached his eyes. I hope this isn't a bad time. It's never a good time to discuss foreclosure, Mr. Donovan, Sarah replied, reluctantly stepping aside to let him enter. But I assume that's why you're here. Donovan moved into the living room with the confidence of someone accustomed to delivering bad news in other people's homes. His gaze swept over the faded wallpaper, the worn furniture, the gaps where valuable antiques had recently stood. I see you've been selling things, he observed, removing a leather portfolio from his briefcase. Unfortunately, unless you can produce approximately $68,000 within 18 days, it won't be enough. Sarah felt her face flush. The auction house is still evaluating some items. Of course, Donovan nodded, not bothering to hide his skepticism. But given the condition of the property and current market values, I'm obligated to inform you that even liquidating everything visible here wouldn't cover the outstanding balance. As he spoke, Sarah noticed his attention drift toward the basement door, which stood slightly ajar. She had been so consumed with studying the documents that she'd forgotten to lock it. The property inspection is scheduled for next week, Donovan continued, but I thought I might take a preliminary look while I'm here. Standard procedure. Before Sarah could object, he was moving toward the basement door with practiced efficiency. The basement isn't safe, she blurted. The floors, there's water damage. Donovan paused, one eyebrow raised. Water damage is precisely the sort of thing our inspectors need to document, Mrs. Mitchell. It affects the property value. I'd prefer to wait for the official inspection, Sarah insisted, moving to block his path. When my daughters are at school. Something in her tone must have registered, because Donovan stepped back, his professional smile returning. As you wish. But I should warn you, hiding property damage won't change the bank's position. This house has been in arrears for months, and your father-in-law's second mortgage depleted whatever equity remained. Grandfather, Sarah corrected automatically. Howard was my grandfather. Of course, Donovan nodded, though his expression suggested the distinction hardly mattered. Either way, unless you can produce a significant payment by month's end, you should begin making arrangements to vacate. After he left, Sarah leaned against the closed door, heart pounding. The visit had crystallized the urgency of her situation. She had been naive to think she'd have time to carefully research everything in the shelter before making decisions. The bank was circling, and soon they would discover exactly what lay beneath the house, a fortune in stolen goods that would raise impossible questions. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. That evening, after dinner, Sarah gathered her daughters in the living room. Emma, 17 and serious beyond her years, sat cross-legged on the floor sorting through photographs they'd found in the shelter. Lily, 14 and still carrying baby fat that softened her features, lounged on the sofa, flipping through her great-grandfather's journal with wide-eyed fascination. We need to talk about what happens next, Sarah began. Mr. Donovan came by today. The bank is moving forward with foreclosure. But we found actual treasure, Lily protested. We're rich now, right? Like, millionaire rich? Sarah shook her head. It's not that simple. Everything in that shelter was taken from people during the war. None of it belongs to us. But great-grandpa brought it here, Lily argued. He kept it all these years. That doesn't make it ours, Emma interjected, her voice carrying the righteous certainty of youth. Those Nazi guys stole it from Jewish families who got sent to concentration camps. We can't just keep it. Lily's expression darkened. So we'll lose the house because you want to be morally superior? Where are we supposed to go, Emma? You think Mom can afford an apartment on substitute teacher pay? Girls, Sarah interrupted, raising her hand. This isn't about what Emma thinks or what Lily wants. It's about doing what's right. Your great-grandfather spent decades trying to return these things to their proper owners or their families. Then why didn't he? Lily challenged. Why keep it all in a secret room if he was such a hero? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its simplicity. Sarah had been asking herself the same thing since discovering the shelter. I think. She began slowly, I think he couldn't find them at first. Europe was chaos after the war. Entire families had been wiped out. Records were destroyed. And later, when the Cold War started, half of Europe was behind the Iron Curtain. By the time archives opened up and technology made searching easier, he was already sick. Emma nodded thoughtfully. The most recent research in his files was from just before his diagnosis. He was still trying. So we finish what he started, Sarah concluded. We find the rightful owners. How exactly do we do that? Lily demanded. We're about to be homeless, Mom. We don't have money for fancy lawyers or private investigators or trips to Europe. We need help, Sarah admitted. Professional help from someone who knows about this kind of thing. Someone who won't immediately report us to the authorities or try to take everything for themselves. Emma looked up sharply. What about Professor Levinson? From the university? Great-grandpa used to exchange letters with him. Sarah considered this. Daniel Levinson was a renowned historian specializing in Holocaust studies at the State University 30 miles away. Howard had indeed corresponded with him, even attended several of his lectures before his health declined. It's worth a try, she agreed. But we need to be careful what we reveal, at least at first. If word gets out about what we found, we'll have government agencies and treasure hunters descending on us before we can blink. That night, after the girls had gone to bed, Sarah returned to the shelter alone. The weight of responsibility pressed against her chest as she surveyed the contents, easily millions in gold, jewelry, and artwork, all of it tainted by the darkest chapter in modern history. In the corner, partially hidden behind the radio equipment, she noticed a small metal box she hadn't examined before. Inside, she found her grandfather's military identification, medals she'd never seen displayed in the house upstairs, and photographs of a much younger Howard Mitchell standing among ruins with other uniformed men. One photo in particular caught her attention, Howard kneeling beside an open crate, carefully wrapping something in protective cloth, his expression solemn. On the back, in the same precise handwriting as the journal, was written, Rothschild Collection Recovery, Alta Sea Salt Mine, June 1945. Items not on official manifest marked for secondary transport. Secondary transport. The phrase appeared throughout Howard's journal, always in relation to items that never made it onto official inventories. At first, Sarah had assumed her grandfather had been documenting thefts by other soldiers, reporting on corruption he had witnessed. But the photograph suggested a more difficult truth. Howard Mitchell, decorated war hero and the kindest man she'd ever known, had participated in the diversion of Nazi-looted treasures. "Oh, Grandpa," she whispered, the photograph trembling in her hand. "What did they make you do?" Her ruminations were interrupted by the distinct sound of the basement door opening above. Sarah froze, listening intently. It was nearly midnight, the girls should be asleep. The measured footsteps crossing the basement floor were too heavy for either of her daughters. Quickly extinguishing her flashlight, Sarah pressed herself against the shelter wall beside the entrance, heart hammering in her chest. The hatch creaked open, and a beam of light swept across the room. In the silence, she could hear breathing, controlled, deliberate. "Mrs. Mitchell," a male voice called softly. "I know you're down here." With a rush of terror, Sarah recognized Thomas Donovan's voice. The bank representative had returned, apparently having watched the house until she'd come down alone. "This is private property, Mr. Donovan," she responded, trying to keep her voice steady as she stepped into view. "You're trespassing." Donovan descended the stairs with unsettling calm, his flashlight beam intentionally directed at her face. "Interesting choice of words, considering what you're hiding down here." "I'm not hiding anything. This is a bomb shelter my grandfather built during the Cold War." "Is that so?" Donovan smiled thinly, sweeping his light across the crates and filing cabinets. "Most bomb shelters don't contain museum-quality artwork and Nazi documentation." The casual recognition in his voice sent a chill through Sarah. "How would you know what's Nazi documentation?" Donovan ignored the question, moving toward one of the open crates. "You know, I've been handling this property for months, ever since your grandfather fell behind on his payments. Bank procedure required a complete property assessment, including examination of structural modifications. He paused, glancing back at her. Your grandfather's dementia made him quite talkative during my visits. He seemed to think I was someone from his past. Understanding dawned on Sarah with sickening clarity. You knew about this room before he died. I suspected, Donovan corrected, lifting one of the canvas bags and weighing it in his hand. Howard Mitchell was a man with secrets, that much was obvious to anyone who bothered to look beyond the kindly grandfather facade. The question was whether those secrets had value. So you pressured him into a second mortgage he didn't need, Sarah realized, anger displacing her fear. You took advantage of a dying man with dementia. Donovan shrugged. I offered a financial service to a property owner. Everything was perfectly legal. What do you want? Initially, I wanted to find this room without interference, Donovan replied, his attention now fixed on the filing cabinet. The foreclosure was simply meant to clear the property so I could search thoroughly once you and your daughters were gone. But now that you've done the hard work of finding it for me, I'm willing to make an arrangement. There's no arrangement to make, Sarah said firmly. None of this belongs to me, and it certainly doesn't belong to you. These items were stolen from people who were murdered in concentration camps. And your grandfather stole them again, Donovan countered smoothly. Or did you think he was keeping all this as evidence? The U.S. government would have confiscated everything decades ago if he'd reported it properly. The accusation struck Sarah like a physical blow. She had been wrestling with the same suspicion, but hearing it spoken aloud by this stranger felt like a betrayal of Howard's memory. You didn't know him, she said quietly. I know human nature, Mrs. Mitchell. And I know that the contents of this room are worth millions to the right buyers. Donovan gestured around the shelter. I'm prepared to make this foreclosure go away. You keep the house, I take these problematic historical artifacts off your hands, and we both walk away satisfied. And the families these things were stolen from? Dead for 75 years, most likely, Donovan dismissed with a wave. The few who survived have already received reparations from various governments. This would just disappear into some museum basement if it were turned over to authorities now. The calculated indifference in his voice clarified something for Sarah. Whatever moral ambiguity surrounded her grandfather's actions, there was none in the choice before her now. I think you should leave, Mr. Donovan, she said with unexpected steadiness. And if you come back, it will be to a house that's been thoroughly examined by Holocaust restitution experts, federal authorities, and reporters from every major newspaper. Donovan's expression hardened. That would be extraordinarily unwise, Mrs. Mitchell. Think about your daughters. Do you really want them associated with Nazi-looted treasures their great-grandfather stole? Because that's the story that will emerge, regardless of whatever noble intentions you attribute to Howard now. You're threatening me, Sarah observed, an unexpected calm settling over her. Which means you're more afraid of exposure than I am. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Donovan's face. I'm offering you a solution to problems you don't fully comprehend. Once government agencies get involved, you'll lose control completely. They'll take everything, the artifacts, the house, possibly even your grandfather's military pension if they determine he committed crimes. Maybe, Sarah acknowledged. But I'll still have the truth. And my daughters will know I chose it, whatever the cost. The standoff stretched between them, broken only when the basement door creaked open above. Mom? Emma's voice called down. Is everything okay? I heard voices. Before Sarah could respond, Donovan moved with surprising speed, grabbing her arm and lowering his voice. Think carefully about your next move, Mrs. Mitchell. You have until the foreclosure date to reconsider. After that, events will unfold beyond your control. He released her and called up cheerfully, just finishing up some paperwork with your mother, Emma. Bank business, nothing to worry about. As Donovan climbed the stairs, Sarah remained in the shelter, her mind racing. He was right about one thing: once authorities became involved, she would lose all agency in determining what happened to her grandfather's secret collection. But the alternative he offered was unthinkable: a betrayal of both the original victims and whatever redemption Howard had sought through his decades of research. Later that night, after assuring Emma that everything was fine, a lie that sat heavy on her conscience, Sarah sat at the kitchen table with her grandfather's journal open before her. She had been reading chronologically, but now she flipped to the final entries, written in a hand made shaky by age and illness. October 18, 2016, she read. Levinson confirms Bernstein family survivors located in Argentina. Photographs sent, awaiting verification of provenance. Must finish this before time runs out. The next entry, dated 3 days later, was the last. Fell today. Doctor says tests needed. Afraid memory already going. Must protect the collection until arrangements complete. D.L. will know what to do if I cannot finish. D.L. Daniel Levinson. The professor Emma had mentioned. With renewed purpose, Sarah closed the journal and opened her laptop. If Donovan returned before the foreclosure deadline, she needed to be prepared. And if her grandfather had indeed been working with Professor Levinson, perhaps the historian already knew more than she realized. The university website listed Daniel Levinson's office hours and contact information. Distinguished Professor of Holocaust Studies and Art Restitution, with specializations in Nazi-looted art recovery and survivor family tracing. The professional credentials were impressive, but it was the photograph that caught Sarah's attention: an older man with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, somehow familiar though she couldn't recall meeting him. Sarah composed a careful email, mentioning her grandfather's name and their recent discovery of his correspondence, requesting a meeting about family historical materials related to post-war Europe. She deliberately avoided any mention of the shelter or its contents, aware that electronic communications were far from secure. After sending the message, Sarah made one more decision before heading to bed. Moving quietly through the sleeping house, she descended again to the secret room and selected a single item: a small leather notebook with a family name embossed on the cover. If Professor Levinson was indeed the ally her grandfather had trusted, this would be proof of what they'd found without revealing too much too soon. As she secured the shelter and climbed the basement stairs, Sarah felt the weight of her grandfather's secret pressing down alongside her own growing resolve. Something had prevented Howard Mitchell from completing his self-assigned mission of returning what had been stolen. Whether it was failing health, bureaucratic obstacles, or something darker, she couldn't yet know. But Thomas Donovan's midnight visit had clarified the stakes. The bank representative knew about the shelter, had possibly known even before Howard's death, and was determined to claim its contents for himself. He had manipulated her grandfather during his vulnerable final months, and now he was attempting to intimidate her with threats of exposure and financial ruin. Sarah locked the basement door and slid a heavy bookcase in front of it, a temporary measure at best, but better than nothing. Tomorrow she would install new locks, but tonight, exhaustion pulled at her limbs with undeniable force. In her bedroom, Sarah placed the leather notebook in her bedside drawer and set her phone on the nightstand. The screen showed a new email notification that hadn't been there before. Opening it with trembling fingers, she read, "Mrs. Mitchell, I've been waiting for your message for a very long time. Your grandfather and I had an agreement. I'll see you tomorrow at my office, 2 p.m. Bring nothing but yourself and whatever questions you're ready to ask." Daniel Levinson. The directness of the response, sent minutes after midnight, suggested the professor had been watching for her name specifically. Whatever connection he'd shared with Howard went beyond casual academic correspondence. Tomorrow would bring answers, but for now, Sarah needed rest. As she drifted towards sleep, her thoughts returned to the photograph of her grandfather kneeling beside looted treasures in 1945. What choices had the young soldier made amid the chaos of post-war Europe? What burdens had he carried home to this quiet house, hidden beneath floorboards and behind the facade of an ordinary life? And most troubling of all, if Howard Mitchell had been trying to return what was stolen, why had he kept it hidden for more than 7 decades? The answers lay somewhere between the meticulous journal entries, the carefully preserved artifacts, and perhaps in the memories of a Holocaust studies professor who had been expecting her message for a very long time. The pale morning light filtered through the university windows as Sarah Mitchell sat in Professor Daniel Levinson's cluttered office. Books lined every wall, documents crowded his desk, and the air carried the comforting scent of old paper and leather bindings. At 78, Levinson moved with deliberate precision, his wire-rimmed glasses perched on a prominent nose, and his eyes, sharp with intelligence, never left Sarah's face as she finished recounting the events of the past week. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Howard told me about you, Levinson said finally, his voice carrying the slight accent of someone who had learned English in adulthood. He was very proud. Said you had his stubborn streak, the good kind that doesn't bend when the world pushes. You knew him well? Sarah asked, still uncertain how much to reveal about what they'd found. Since 1978, the professor nodded, rising slowly to retrieve a leather-bound album from his bookshelf. I was researching restitution cases for my dissertation when I stumbled across records that connected certain recovered artworks to your grandfather's unit. Most academics would have dismissed it as a coincidence, but I've never believed in coincidences when it comes to missing Nazi treasures. He placed the album on the desk between them and opened it to reveal newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten correspondence spanning decades. Howard Mitchell was reluctant to speak with me at first. Claimed he was just a soldier following orders. But I was persistent, and eventually, he recognized that I wasn't interested in punishment, only truth. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she turned pages that documented a 40-year relationship between the professor and her grandfather. He never mentioned you to me. He was protecting you, Levinson said simply. The fewer people who knew, the safer you would be. Safer from what? Sarah asked, though a part of her already suspected the answer. From men like your bank representative, Mr. Donovan. The professor's expression hardened. Howard contacted me about him 6 months ago. He suspected Donovan had discovered something during a property assessment and was pressuring him into unnecessary loans. But why would Grandpa need protecting? He was just trying to return stolen property to its rightful owners. Levinson's gaze grew distant. The story is complicated. Your grandfather was part of the Monuments, Fine Arts, and Archives program, the Monuments Men as they're popularly known now. Their official mission was to recover cultural treasures looted by the Nazis. But some items never made it into official records, Sarah said quietly, remembering Donovan's accusations. Items marked for secondary transport in Grandpa's journal. The professor nodded grimly. The chaos of post-war Europe created opportunities for both justice and exploitation. Some officers saw a chance for personal gain. Others believed certain valuable items should be diverted to American museums rather than returned to countries that might soon fall behind the Iron Curtain. And a very few, recognized that many Jewish families had been completely erased, their property stolen long before it entered Nazi collections. What did my grandfather believe? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Levinson's expression softened. Howard Mitchell believed in doing what was right, even when it contradicted orders. When he discovered certain commanding officers were selecting valuable pieces for alternate disposition, he began creating his own inventory, documenting what was taken and from whom, whenever that information could be determined. So the items in the shelter. Sarah began. Were rescued twice, Levinson finished. First from the Nazis, then from those who would have exploited them again. Howard didn't steal that collection, Mrs. Mitchell. He preserved it when it would have otherwise disappeared into private collections or been appropriated by governments with questionable claims to ownership. Sarah thought of the journals, the meticulous documentation, the decades of correspondence and research. He was trying to find the original owners. Or their descendants, Levinson confirmed. A nearly impossible task in 1945 became merely extremely difficult by the 1970s, and somewhat manageable by the early 2000s. Digitized records, DNA databases, international cooperation, the tools improved, and Howard was nothing if not methodical. But he never finished, Sarah said. Some items were still in that shelter when he died. And now they've found you. Levinson removed his glasses, polishing them with a handkerchief. Howard always worried about that. He wanted to complete the work himself, spare you the burden. But time ran out. A question that had been nagging at Sarah finally found voice. Professor, if my grandfather was doing the right thing, why hide it? Why not work through official channels, especially in recent decades when Holocaust restitution became a priority for many governments? The professor's smile was sad. Because officially, he was a thief. The statute of limitations protects him now, but revealing what he'd done would have meant disgrace, possibly prison in earlier decades. The U.S. government doesn't look kindly on soldiers who divert valuable assets, regardless of their intentions. And the items themselves would have been caught in legal battles for generations, claimed by museums, governments, private collectors, all arguing about provenance while the actual families who suffered remained sidelined. He leaned forward, his expression intent. Howard found a different path. Working quietly, he managed to return over 200 items to descendants of Holocaust victims over the past 40 years. No lawyers, no publicity, no institutions claiming finders' rights or demanding authentication fees. Just quiet justice, one family at a time. Sarah thought of the crates still hidden in her basement, the paintings and jewelry and gold coins that represented both immense material value and incalculable human loss. And now it's my responsibility. If you choose to accept it, Levinson nodded. Though I should warn you, the path Howard chose carries risks. Your Mr. Donovan is not the first to discover hints of the collection, nor will he be the last. The myth of Nazi gold brings out the worst in people. He's threatening to expose my grandfather as a thief if I don't let him take everything, Sarah admitted. A predictable tactic, Levinson said, his voice hardening again. One that has worked on others in similar positions. The question is, what do you want to do, Mrs. Mitchell? The directness of the question caught Sarah off guard. Since discovering the shelter, she'd been reacting to circumstances rather than shaping them, responding to her daughter's questions, Donovan's threats, the immediate pressure of the foreclosure. Now, faced with a man who had shared her grandfather's secret mission for decades, she found herself considering longer horizons. I want to finish what he started, she said finally. Return these things to the families they were stolen from. But I also need to protect my daughters. We're about to lose our home, and I don't have the resources to fight the bank. Levinson nodded thoughtfully. Howard anticipated this dilemma. That's why he made arrangements. Arrangements? The professor opened his desk drawer and removed a sealed envelope, yellowed with age. He left this with me 20 years ago, to be given to you if something happened before he completed his work. He updated it periodically, most recently last year. Sarah accepted the envelope with trembling hands. Her name was written across the front in her grandfather's distinctive script. Breaking the seal, she found a single sheet of paper, not the lengthy explanation she had expected, but a brief letter addressed to her. My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, I've left you with questions I had hoped to answer in person. First and most important, I'm sorry. The burden I carried should have ended with me, not passed to you. Professor Levinson can explain the history of my collection and help you complete what I could not. Trust him as I have. He knows the family's still waiting for justice. As for practical matters, the gold coins in the southeast corner crate are not subject to restitution claims. They were payment for my silence in 1945, offered by men who are now long dead. I refused to profit from them in life, but I set them aside for you and the girls should this day come. They will resolve your financial concerns while you determine what to do about the rest. Whatever you decide, know that I am proud of you. The true inheritance I leave is not gold or artwork, but the certainty that doing what is right matters, even when no one is watching. With all my love, Grandpa. Sarah read the letter twice before looking up at Levinson, who watched her with understanding in his eyes. The gold coins, she said quietly. He says they're not part of the looted items. Your grandfather was offered bribes several times by those who wanted his cooperation or silence, Levinson confirmed. He kept the gold but refused to spend it, calling it blood money. But he always maintained it might be needed someday to protect the larger mission. How much? Sarah began, then stopped, embarrassed by the materialistic question. Enough to save your home and provide security while you determine the best course for the rest of the collection, Levinson said, answering her unfinished thought. I can help you convert them discreetly through contacts who won't ask difficult questions. The offer represented salvation, financial security for her family without compromising the integrity of her grandfather's mission. Yet Sarah found herself hesitating. Even if these particular coins weren't directly looted, they're still connected to theft. Taking them feels complicated. All inheritance is complicated, Levinson observed. We receive what previous generations leave us, their triumphs and failures, their wisdom and their secrets. Howard didn't want you to profit from suffering, but he did want you to have choices. The professor leaned forward, his expression earnest. Sometimes the perfect moral choice isn't available, Mrs. Mitchell. Sometimes we must simply make the best choice among imperfect options. By the time Sarah returned home that afternoon, her mind was clearer than it had been in days. Professor Levinson had outlined a path forward, not an easy one, but one that honored both her grandfather's intentions and her family's needs. The gold would resolve the immediate financial crisis, while the professor's connections would help identify the rightful owners of the remaining items. Emma and Lily were waiting on the porch, their expressions a mixture of concern and curiosity. Sarah had left them a note about meeting the professor but provided few details. Is everything okay? Emma asked as Sarah climbed the porch steps. Did Professor Levinson know about great-grandpa's stuff? He did, Sarah confirmed, settling into the weathered porch swing beside her daughters. And he's going to help us figure out what to do with it. Over the next hour, Sarah explained what she had learned, the true nature of her grandfather's collection, the decades he had spent secretly returning items, and the arrangement he had made to protect them in the event of his death. The girls listened intently, interrupting occasionally with questions but mostly absorbing the remarkable story of their great-grandfather's quiet crusade. So he wasn't stealing, Lily said finally, the relief evident in her voice. He was saving things from being stolen again. It's more complicated than that, Sarah admitted. Legally, what he did was still wrong. He diverted valuable items that should have gone through official channels. But morally... She paused, considering her words carefully. Morally, I believe he made the best choice available in an impossible situation. And he spent the rest of his life trying to make it right. What about the gold coins? Emma asked, always practical. Are we really going to use those to save the house? Sarah nodded slowly. Professor Levinson is helping me arrange the sale of a few coins, just enough to pay off the mortgage and give us some breathing room. The rest will be documented and stored properly until we determine whether they have legitimate claimants. And Mr. Donovan? Lily asked, her expression darkening. What if he comes back? Professor Levinson is handling that too, Sarah said, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. Apparently, Donovan isn't the first person to discover hints of Howard's collection and attempt extortion. The professor has experience with such situations. What Sarah didn't share was the steel she had glimpsed beneath Levinson's scholarly exterior when she mentioned Donovan's threats. Men like that rely on fear and isolation, he had told her. They assume you have no allies, no resources, no countermeasures. We will disabuse him of that notion. True to his word, within days of their meeting, Thomas Donovan was quietly transferred to the bank's corporate office 3 states away. The foreclosure proceedings were mysteriously placed on administrative hold, and a different bank representative, a kind-faced woman named Eleanor who had known Howard for years, contacted Sarah about resolving the outstanding balance at her convenience. 2 weeks after discovering the secret shelter, Sarah stood in her grandfather's workshop behind the house, surrounded by the tools and projects that had occupied his hands during his healthier years. The space smelled of sawdust and machine oil, comfortingly familiar yet different now that she understood more about the man who had created it. Through the window, she could see Emma and Lily in the garden, clearing weeds from beds that had been neglected since Howard's health began to fail. The girls had changed since learning their great-grandfather's secret, Lily less concerned with material things, Emma less rigid in her judgments. They were working together to restore the garden, a project that would have pleased Howard immensely. "They're strong," a voice observed from the workshop doorway. Professor Levinson stood there, leaning slightly on a carved wooden cane. "Like their mother." "Like Howard." Sarah smiled, gesturing for him to enter. "Thank you for coming. I wasn't sure if you'd want to see it in person." "I've been curious for decades," Levinson admitted, moving carefully among the workbenches and shelves. "Howard described his workshop to me many times, but never invited me here. Too risky," he said, to have known connections to Holocaust researchers visiting his home. Together they walked to the back of the workshop, where Sarah had cleared away a section of flooring to reveal another hatch, smaller than the one in the basement, but constructed with the same meticulous care. "He created a network beneath the property," Sarah explained. "The main shelter under the house, this access point from the workshop, and a third entrance hidden in the old root cellar behind the barn. All connected by narrow tunnels." Paranoid, yet practical, Levinson nodded appreciatively. If one entrance was discovered, the others would provide alternative access. Howard always thought 3 steps ahead. Sarah led the way down the narrow stairs and through a passage barely wide enough for a person to walk upright. Unlike the main shelter, which had been designed for potential habitation, these connecting tunnels were purely functional: dirt floors, timber-reinforced walls, and just enough headroom to avoid stooping. "I found this section yesterday," she explained as they navigated the confined space. "I've been exploring the full extent of what he built." The passage opened into a small room Sarah hadn't previously discovered, distinct from the main shelter. Where the primary vault contained artifacts and documentation, this space held something else entirely: personal mementos that Howard had preserved from his time in Europe. A bulletin board covered one wall, pinned with photographs of young soldiers standing amid the ruins of war-torn towns. Newspaper clippings chronicled the activities of the monument's men, though none mentioned Howard specifically. A display case contained medals and insignia, including several that didn't appear to be American. But it was the table at the center of the room that drew their attention, a wooden surface covered with a large map of Europe, with colored pins marking dozens of locations. Beside it lay a journal distinct from the one Sarah had found in the main shelter, its leather cover worn from frequent handling. "His personal records," Levinson breathed, approaching the table with reverence. "Howard mentioned keeping separate documentation of his restitution efforts, but I never saw it directly." Sarah nodded. "He logged everything: the items he returned, the families he found, the journeys he took. Some entries date back to the 1950s, long before you met him." "May I?" the professor asked, gesturing toward the journal. "Please," Sarah said. "I think he would have wanted you to see it." As Levinson carefully turned the pages of her grandfather's private journal, Sarah studied the map with its constellation of pins. Each one represented a family whose treasures had been stolen, whose lives had been shattered by genocide, and whose small piece of justice Howard Mitchell had personally delivered. "Remarkable," Levinson murmured as he read. "He was more successful than I realized. These entries document the return of items to over 300 families across 5 continents. And yet he never spoke of it," Sarah observed. "Not even to me. Some burdens are carried alone not because we don't trust others, but because we love them too much to share the weight," the professor said quietly. Howard made difficult choices in 1945, choices that haunted him, even as he spent decades trying to make them right. Sarah thought of the letter her grandfather had left, with its simple apology for passing his burden to her. Now, standing amid the physical evidence of his lifelong quest for redemption, she felt not burden but pride in the quiet courage of a man who had chosen a difficult path and followed it faithfully to the end of his strength. "Professor," she said, "I'd like to establish a foundation. Something permanent that can continue this work even after the current collection is fully resolved." Levinson looked up from the journal, his expression thoughtful. "What do you have in mind?" "The Mitchell-Levinson Holocaust Restitution Foundation," Sarah said, the name coming to her with surprising clarity. "Using a portion of the gold coins as endowment, we could create an organization specifically focused on helping families recover lost treasures without the legal and financial barriers of institutional involvement." Howard would have approved. Levinson nodded, unexpected emotion glinting in his eyes. "But why include my name?" "Because you kept his secret for 40 years, Sarah said simply. "You were his partner in this mission, even if you worked separately most of the time. And now you're helping me continue it. The foundation should honor you both." As they made their way back through the tunnel toward the workshop entrance, Sarah felt a sense of rightness settling over her. The house that had seemed a burden 2 weeks ago now represented a legacy worth preserving, not for its monetary value, but for the story it contained and the mission it would continue to support. Emerging into the sunlit workshop, they found Emma and Lily waiting, garden dirt still smudging their clothes and hands. "We found something," Emma announced, holding out a small metal box unearthed during their gardening efforts. It was buried under the rose bushes. The box contained a single item, a faded photograph of Howard as a young soldier, standing beside a woman Sarah didn't recognize. On the back, in her grandfather's handwriting, were the words, "Rebecca Goldstein, Paris, 1946. First return." "The first item he returned," Levinson said softly, recognizing the significance immediately. He mentioned her in his correspondence, a Holocaust survivor who had lost her entire family. Howard found her in a displaced persons camp and returned a small portrait that had belonged to her parents. "There's something else," Lily added, pointing to the corner of the photograph where nearly invisible numbers had been written. "It looks like coordinates." Later that evening, after Professor Levinson had departed with promises to begin laying groundwork for the foundation, Sarah sat on the porch with her daughters, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. The coordinates from the photograph lay on the table between them, along with her grandfather's world atlas. "It's a location in southern France," Emma noted, having already looked it up. "Near the Spanish border." "Do you think there's more hidden there?" Lily asked, excitement coloring her voice. "Like a secret cache or something?" Sarah smiled, imagining her grandfather's methodical mind and his careful planning. "I don't know. But I think we're meant to find out." As darkness settled over the old Victorian house that had sheltered generations of Mitchells, Sarah felt a profound connection to the man who had raised her, not just the kindly grandfather she had known, but the complex, courageous young soldier who had made a moral choice amid the ruins of war, then spent a lifetime honoring that choice through quiet acts of justice. The journey ahead would not be easy. There were still crates in the shelter waiting for resolution, families to be found, histories to be restored. The newly conceived foundation would require careful development to ensure it served its intended purpose. And the mysterious coordinates in France represented yet another layer of Howard Mitchell's carefully constructed legacy. But for the first time since her grandfather's death, Sarah felt certain about the path forward. Whatever secrets still lay hidden, in the shelter, in the garden, or in distant locations marked by faded coordinates, they were no longer burdens to be feared but guideposts for the journey ahead. "What now?" Emma asked as the first stars appeared above them. Sarah took her daughter's hands, forming an unbroken circle on the porch where Howard had spent countless evenings watching the same stars. "Now we continue what he started," she said simply. "Not because we have to, but because it's right. Because some treasures are meant to be returned, some stories are meant to be completed, and some legacies are meant to be honored." Around them, the old house creaked and settled, its foundations solid despite the secrets they contained. Beneath their feet lay passages that connected past to present, concealment to revelation, loss to restoration. And in their joined hands rested the true inheritance Howard Mitchell had left behind, not gold or artifacts, but the courage to choose justice even when easier paths beckoned. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight, under a canopy of stars their grandfather had contemplated through decades of patient work, the Mitchell women sat together in the growing darkness, guardians of a legacy that would shine long after they, too, had passed into memory. 6 months after Sarah Mitchell discovered her grandfather's secret shelter, autumn painted the countryside in shades of amber and gold. The Victorian farmhouse, once threatened by foreclosure, now stood proudly amid manicured gardens where Emma and Lily had spent the summer cultivating heirloom vegetables and restoring flower beds to their former glory. The mortgage had been paid in full, the bank's interest in the property settled with the quiet efficiency that characterized Professor Levinson's involvement. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. In the renovated barn behind the house, Sarah stood before a gathering of 24 people, Holocaust survivors, descendants of victims, museum curators, and historians who had traveled from across the country to witness the official launch of the Mitchell Levinson Holocaust Restitution Foundation. Professor Levinson sat in the front row, his thin frame slightly stooped but his eyes bright with approval as Sarah addressed the small crowd. My grandfather once told me that the truest measure of a person isn't what they take from this world, but what they restore to it, she began, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. Howard Mitchell returned from Europe in 1945 carrying burdens no young man should bear, along with treasures that represented the shattered lives of people he would never meet. Today, we formalize his lifelong mission, not just to return what was stolen, but to restore connections broken by history's darkest chapter. Among the attendees sat the Bernstein family, descendants of Austrian Jews whose family portrait Howard had recovered from a Nazi officer's private collection. Rachel Bernstein, a woman in her 70s who had been born in a displaced persons camp after the war, held the small painting in her lap, her fingers occasionally tracing the faces of grandparents she had never known. Beside her, 3 generations of Bernsteins represented the family line that Hitler's regime had tried to erase, living proof that restoration was possible, even after unimaginable loss. The Mitchell Levinson Foundation will operate on 3 principles, Sarah continued, gesturing toward display boards where the mission statement was elegantly printed. First, we will continue identifying and returning items to descendants of Holocaust victims without financial or legal barriers. Second, we will document these stories to ensure future generations understand both what was lost and what was reclaimed. And third, we will support education initiatives that connect Holocaust history to ongoing questions of justice, restitution, and remembrance. As Sarah spoke, Emma moved quietly among the guests, distributing brochures outlining the foundation's structure and objectives. At 17, she had already committed to studying Holocaust history in college, inspired by her great-grandfather's secret mission. Lily, less academic but equally devoted to the cause, had spent weeks helping Professor Levinson's graduate students catalog and photograph the remaining items from the shelter, developing an intuitive understanding of the artifacts and their significance. After the formal presentation, guests mingled in the renovated barn that now served as the foundation's headquarters. The space had been transformed from a dilapidated storage area to a combination museum, research center, and gathering place. Glass display cases held examples of returned items, photographs beside empty spaces where treasures had once rested, now accompanied by descriptions of their journey home and the families who had received them. Sarah found herself standing beside Rachel Bernstein, who was studying one such display with tears glistening in her eyes. Your grandfather returned our family portrait in 1979, the elderly woman said, her accent still carrying traces of her European heritage. I was 32 then, raising children of my own. He traveled all the way to Buenos Aires to find us, though we had almost forgotten what we had lost. Did you meet him? Sarah asked, realizing how little she knew about Howard's actual encounters with the families he had helped. Rachel nodded, a small smile softening her features. He was such a quiet man, almost shy. He wouldn't stay for dinner, wouldn't accept any reward. He said only that he was fulfilling a promise made long ago. She paused, studying Sarah's face. You have his eyes, you know. Kind eyes that see clearly. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Later that evening, after the guests had departed and even Professor Levinson had returned to his campus apartment, Sarah sat on the porch swing with her daughters flanking her on either side. The night air carried the scent of ripening apples from the small orchard Howard had planted decades earlier, and crickets provided a gentle soundtrack to their contemplation. "Do you think he would have approved?" Lily asked, leaning against her mother's shoulder. "Great-grandpa, I mean. Of everything we've done with his collection?" Sarah considered the question, thinking of the meticulous journals Howard had kept, the careful documentation of each item and its provenance, the decades he had spent searching for families scattered by war and persecution. "I think this is exactly what he wanted," she said finally. "He just couldn't do it openly during his lifetime. Because he would have been in trouble for taking the things in the first place," Emma added, always mindful of the moral complexity underlying their inherited mission. "Yes," Sarah acknowledged. "But also because public institutions would have claimed the items, locked them away in legal disputes for decades. He wanted direct restitution, person to person, family to family. The foundation had been structured to honor that philosophy. Unlike large museums or government agencies that often became entangled in international disputes over ownership, the Mitchell-Levinson Foundation operated quietly, prioritizing moral claims over legal technicalities. The modest endowment created from Howard's blood money, the gold coins he had accepted but never spent, now funded research, travel, and the occasional legal battle when obstacles arose. Professor Levinson says we've identified families for almost everything in the collection now," Emma noted. "What happens when it's all returned? Does the foundation just end?" Sarah smiled at her daughter's practical question. "There are thousands more items still missing from that period, things Howard never had access to, collections scattered in private hands or hidden away like ours was. The mission doesn't end just because our particular treasures have found their way home." The conversation drifted into comfortable silence as darkness settled more completely around them. In the distance, headlights appeared on the long driveway that led to the main road, Professor Levinson's assistant returning with forgotten paperwork. The young graduate student, Michael Abramovitz, had become a frequent visitor to the house, his expertise in art provenance proving invaluable to their work. Sarah suspected his interest wasn't entirely professional where Emma was concerned, though both pretended their lengthy discussions of Holocaust history were purely academic. As Michael's car disappeared down the driveway again, Lily yawned dramatically. "I'm going to bed. Some of us have school tomorrow, unlike college-bound geniuses who get to study foundation work for independent study credit." She nudged her sister playfully before kissing Sarah's cheek. "Night, Mom." Emma rolled her eyes but didn't dispute the characterization. Her high school had indeed granted her special academic arrangements to accommodate her work with the foundation, work that had already secured her early acceptance to several prestigious universities despite being only a high school junior. After both girls had gone inside, Sarah remained on the porch, listening to the night sounds that had formed the backdrop to her childhood in this house. The familiar creaking of the old structure settling, the distant hoot of a barn owl that nested somewhere on the property, the soft rustle of wind through dying leaves, all exactly as they had been when Howard sat on this same porch swing, carrying secrets she had never suspected. The coordinates from the photograph had proven significant, though not in the way any of them had expected. The location in southern France had led them not to another hidden cache, but to a small village where Howard had returned the first stolen item, the portrait to Rebecca Goldstein. Local records confirmed that Howard had visited multiple times over the decades, maintaining a correspondence with Rebecca until her death in 1972. Among her personal effects, preserved by distant relatives, they had discovered dozens of letters written in Howard's precise hand, detailing his ongoing mission and the moral questions that haunted him. Those letters now formed the core of a book Professor Levinson was writing about Howard's work, a historical record that would preserve the story without compromising the Foundation's operational security. The Quiet Restorer, Levinson called him in the manuscript, honoring both his achievements and his humility. Sarah's reverie was interrupted by the gentle chime of her phone. The screen displayed a message from an international number she now recognized, the Lowenstein family in Israel, confirming the safe arrival of a silver Kiddush cup that had left Howard's shelter 3 weeks earlier. Attached was a photograph of 3 generations gathered around a Shabbat table, the ceremonial cup prominently displayed in the hands of an elderly patriarch whose trembling smile conveyed more gratitude than words could express. These messages arrived with increasing frequency as the Foundation's work accelerated: photographs, thank you notes, family histories shared in response to returned treasures. Sarah saved each one, building a digital archive that documented the impact of Howard's mission and its continuation through the Foundation. Sometimes the messages included invitations to visit, to be honored, to be celebrated as heroes. These Sarah politely declined, explaining that the Foundation preferred to work quietly, without public recognition. In this, too, she honored her grandfather's example, understanding that some good works flourish best in privacy, away from the complications that publicity inevitably brings. Thomas Donovan had demonstrated the dangers of exposure, though his threat had ultimately proved manageable. Others might not be so easily dissuaded if the full extent of the Foundation's work became widely known. The next morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for the task Sarah had planned. After seeing the girls off to school, she drove to the small cemetery where Howard Mitchell had been laid to rest 18 months earlier. The modest headstone marked not only his grave but also that of her grandmother, Elizabeth, who had died 20 years before Sarah was born. Howard had never remarried, raising Sarah alone after her parents' accident with the same quiet determination that characterized everything he did. Sarah placed fresh flowers between the matching stones, then unfolded a portable chair and sat facing the inscriptions. This had become a monthly ritual, an opportunity to update her grandfather on the Foundation's progress and seek guidance from memories that grew clearer as she learned more about his secret life. "We returned the Lowenstein cup yesterday," she said aloud, her voice soft in the cemetery stillness. "That makes 17 items this month alone. Professor Levinson's connections are proving invaluable. He seems to know Holocaust survivors in every country." A gentle breeze rustled the surrounding trees, carrying the earthy scent of autumn decay and renewal. Sarah continued, describing the Foundation's recent achievements, the growing network of researchers and volunteers, the careful financial management that ensured sustainability. She spoke of Emma's college plans and Lily's budding interest in art restoration, a skill that might serve the Foundation well in years to come. "The house is finally finished too," she added. "The new roof is done, the wiring updated, just like you always wanted to do but never quite got around to." She smiled at the memory of Howard's perpetual home improvement lists, always deferred in favor of his secret mission. "The tunnels have been properly reinforced as well, though we only use the main shelter entrance now. The others are sealed but preserved, a part of the house's history." As she spoke, a familiar figure appeared at the cemetery entrance, Professor Levinson, leaning on his cane as he navigated the gravel path toward Howard's grave. Their monthly visits often coincided, though neither intentionally coordinated the timing. "Giving him the full report?" Levinson asked as he approached, his breath visible in the cool morning air. "Just the highlights," Sarah smiled, rising to offer him her chair, which he declined with a wave. "I've been thinking about those coordinates," Levinson said, adjusting his glasses as he gazed at Howard's headstone. "The ones from the photograph. We assumed they only led to Rebecca Goldstein, but what if there was more to it?" Sarah considered this. The coordinates had indeed led them to the village where Rebecca had settled after the war, providing valuable context for Howard's mission but no additional hidden treasures. "What do you mean?" "Howard never did anything without purpose," Levinson explained. "Those numbers were deliberately preserved, hidden in a place he knew would eventually be discovered. I think they may have additional significance beyond geographic location." "A code of some kind?" The professor nodded. "Possibly. Or perhaps a date, or a reference number in his cataloging system. I've been reviewing his journals again, looking for patterns." This was characteristic of Levinson, always seeking deeper layers, hidden meanings, connections others might miss. His scholarly instincts had proven invaluable to the Foundation's work, complementing Sarah's more intuitive approach to her grandfather's legacy. "I'll help you look," she offered. "The girls have been organizing his workshop materials. Maybe there's something there that connects." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, united by respect for the man whose grave they visited and the mission they had inherited. Though they had known different versions of Howard Mitchell, Levinson the secretive restitution agent, Sarah the devoted grandfather, both recognized the moral core that had driven him through decades of quiet, determined work. He would be proud, Levinson said finally. Not just of the foundation, but of you. The way you've embraced this responsibility without hesitation. I had little choice, Sarah replied. Once I knew the truth, there was only one right path. There is always choice, the professor countered gently. Many would have sold everything and walked away, especially given your financial circumstances when you discovered the shelter. Howard knew that possibility existed, yet he trusted you with his greatest secret. The observation warmed Sarah despite the autumn chill. She had never questioned her decision to continue Howard's mission, but Levinson's words affirmed that it had indeed been a choice, one her grandfather had anticipated she would make correctly. Later that afternoon, Sarah stood in Howard's workshop, surrounded by the organized chaos of a lifetime's accumulation. Emma had begun cataloging the space with typical methodical precision, creating inventory lists of tools, materials, and the various projects her great-grandfather had left in various stages of completion. He was building something when he got sick, Emma explained, leading Sarah to a workbench where pieces of finely crafted wood had been assembled into what appeared to be the beginning of a small cabinet. According to his notes, it was supposed to be a display case, museum quality, with special glass and humidity controls. Sarah ran her fingers along the partially completed piece, recognizing her grandfather's craftsmanship in the precise joinery and careful finishing. For the foundation, you think? Even before we knew about it? That's my guess, Emma nodded. He must have been planning to bring it all into the open eventually. The display case, the organized documentation, the connections with Professor Levinson, he was preparing for the day when secrecy wouldn't be necessary anymore. The realization brought tears to Sarah's eyes, Howard planning for a future he likely knew he wouldn't see, creating the infrastructure for a mission that would outlive him. She had been so focused on the historical aspects of his secret work that she had sometimes forgotten he was also looking forward, preparing the way for what would come after his death. We'll finish it, she decided, studying the careful drawings Howard had made for the completed cabinet. Not just this display case, but all of it, everything he started. That evening, as autumn darkness fell earlier with each passing day, the Mitchell house glowed with warmth and purpose. In the kitchen, Lily experimented with one of her great-grandmother's recipes, discovered in a handwritten cookbook hidden among Elizabeth Mitchell's personal effects. In the study, Emma and Professor Levinson bent over Howard's journals, searching for connections between the mysterious coordinates and other aspects of his documentation system. And in the workshop, Sarah continued where her grandfather had left off, carefully shaping wood for the display case he had envisioned. The foundation's work continued steadily through winter and into spring. Each returned item represented not just the completion of a transaction, but the restoration of memory and connection across generations. Families who had lost everything to Nazi persecution received tangible links to their past, family heirlooms, religious artifacts, artwork, and personal treasures that carried the weight of both tragedy and survival. On the anniversary of Howard's death, the foundation hosted a private ceremony in the garden behind the Victorian farmhouse. 20 families gathered beneath a flowering dogwood tree to dedicate a simple memorial, not a grand monument, but a stone bench inscribed with words from Howard's journal: "What was taken can be restored. What was broken can be mended. What was forgotten can be remembered." As Sarah watched the gathered families, some meeting for the first time, others reconnecting after years apart, she understood that her grandfather's true legacy wasn't just the returned treasures or even the foundation that bore his name. It was the web of human connections rebuilt after systematic destruction, the affirmation that even the most calculated evil could not permanently sever the bonds of memory and belonging. That night, after the guests had departed and the house had quieted, Sarah found herself drawn once more to the secret shelter beneath the basement floor. Though now primarily used for secure storage of items awaiting return, the space retained the solemn atmosphere of its original purpose, a vault of memory, a repository of both tragedy and hope. The main room stood nearly empty now, most of its contents having found their way back to rightful owners or their descendants. What remained were primarily documentation materials, Howard's journals, correspondence, and research files that would eventually be preserved in appropriate archives once the foundation's active work was complete. Sarah settled at the small desk where her grandfather had spent countless hours documenting his collection and tracing family connections across continents and decades. The surface was clear except for a single photograph, the one that had started everything, showing young Howard Mitchell kneeling beside looted treasures in 1945, his expression solemn with the weight of decisions that would shape the rest of his life. "We're finishing it, Grandpa," she whispered to the young soldier in the photograph, so different from the gentle grandfather she had known, yet connected by an unbroken thread of moral purpose. "One piece at a time, one family at a time. Just like you did." The house above creaked and settled, a living entity that had sheltered generations of Mitchells and now protected the final stage of Howard's mission. Within its walls, Emma and Lily slept peacefully, each having found her own connection to their great-grandfather's legacy, Emma through scholarly dedication, Lily through intuitive understanding of the artifacts and their significance. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new discoveries, new connections to be made and restored. The coordinates Professor Levinson was studying might yet reveal additional dimensions of Howard's work. The network of survivors and descendants continued to expand as each returned item created ripples of recognition and remembrance. And the foundation itself evolved, finding its place in the complex landscape of Holocaust restitution and education. But tonight, in the quiet shelter beneath the house that had almost been lost, Sarah Mitchell felt the completion of a circle that had begun 80 years earlier when a young soldier made a moral choice amid the chaos of war. Not an ending, but a continuation, not forgetting, but remembering in a way that honored both loss and survival. Above her, the old Victorian farmhouse stood solid and restored, its foundations strengthened by the truth finally brought to light. Around her, the land that had sheltered Howard's secrets now nurtured new growth, gardens planted by her daughters, trees that would shade future generations, soil that held the memory of all who had tended it. And within her, the quiet certainty that some inheritances transcend material value, that the true legacy of Howard Mitchell lived not in gold or artifacts, but in the courage to restore what had been broken, to remember what others wished forgotten, and to complete what justice demanded, no matter how long the task might take. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.